Thank you, Madam Speaker. 12 months ago and one day, 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 stood in this House and told Territorians she had a roadmap for the future, a plan for the Territory. But unlike so many of the CLP government's big promises to Territorians, this budget is less of a roadmap and more of a weedy goat track. The truth is, Madam Speaker, yesterday's budget lacks a vision for the Territory's future and fails to drive it forward in a meaningful way. The Chief Minister's big promises about reining in budget and responsible fiscal management are up in smoke. More spin from the government. What she and her Treasurer have delivered is the most expensive budget the Territory has ever seen. Territorians have the country's highest net debt per capita, roughly $55,000 per resident. Yet somehow they've still managed to deliver more cuts than a barbershop on a busy Saturday morning. Territory debt, which was forecast to steadily decrease under the former Labor government's stewardship, will increase by an additional $1.5 billion over the next 3 years under the CLP government. They have absolutely no plan to get the spending back under control, other than telling public servants to tighten their belts to the tune of $20 million and then pointing the finger somewhere else. It is quite a feat to deliver the most expensive budget in Territory history, while still making cut after cut. In my first speech to Parliament as the Opposition Leader, Madam Speaker, I said I would spend my time holding this government to account. I said I would do this constructively without criticising for the sake of politicising points. But it would be absolutely remiss of me to stand here today representing fellow Territorians to congratulate the CLP on their budget. It would not be truthful on my part. Madam Speaker, what Territorians want and need is a government that invests in people's success, that invests in a future where every Territorian, no matter where they live, has the chance to thrive. And I acknowledge the CLP's commitment to recycling, Madam Speaker, given there are quite a few Labor initiatives that they have repackaged and pushed out the door and renamed to claim as their own, including a number of significant national partnerships and agreements with the federal Labor Albanese government. The $2 billion to fully fund our Territory government schools, the $4 billion 10-year remote housing package, and the increased funding under the NT Remote Aboriginal Investment Agreement. These are incredibly important initiatives that the former Labor government worked very hard to land and secure. We're pleased that the CLP government is claiming them now because it does show their understanding of how important and significant these agreements are. They are important, Madam Speaker, because they're about lifting fellow Territorians up, about giving our kids the best possible start to life, about building a better, safer and stronger community together. And it is why, on our side, we are so proud to have delivered this when Labor was in government. Madam Speaker, it is hard to see where the CLP government has shown any such strategic vision or foresight in their first budget. But at least we're thankful that those initiatives remain intact. Beyond these reheated announcements, if the budget provides a vision or roadmap for the Territory, it is a bleak one. Despite receiving $800 million in Commonwealth funding this year, and an additional $100 million in the Territory-generated revenue compared to our last budget, the CLP government has failed to invest in key areas. There are deep cuts, Madam Speaker, to infrastructure funding, and that means less funding for roads, less funding for schools, less funding for hospitals and less funding for community building. It means less work out there for Territory businesses and fewer jobs for Territorians. The Territory has the highest rate of homelessness in the country, a significant contributor, unfortunately, to crime and antisocial behaviour across all of our communities. At the same time, Territory families continue to feel the pinch of the cost of living pressures. Knowing this, the government has chosen to slash the housing funding by more than $100 million in their first budget. That's cuts to urban housing, remote housing, cuts to government employee housing and housing in homelands and on our town camps. The economy-driving tourism sector has copped a funding cut too, which simply defies belief. Given the many thousands of small businesses here in the Territory, Territory workers, Territory family businesses that rely on the thriving tourism and hospitality sector to earn a living. Our natural resources also lose out, with an $11 million cut to measures that protect and maintain our beautiful natural resources and the Territory lifestyle we all love to enjoy. This includes scrapping Aboriginal Ranger grants, a huge shock to us yesterday when going through the budget papers. An independent review of the grants program found that it had made a profound contribution to land management across the Northern Territory, not to mention critical jobs and community-based industries that have benefited from the previous Labor government's initiative of the Aboriginal Ranger grants. Our ranger groups on country use these capital grants for vehicles, for equipment that allow access to country, for critical land management activities, as well as equipment for weed control, feral animal removal and fire mitigation to look after country, not just for those groups, but for all of us to enjoy. Scrapping this very important program is a massive blow to land and sea management right across the Northern Territory, as are the deep cuts to water resource management, water security improvements and rangelands funding. There are also cuts of around $14 million in the agricultural space, including biosecurity and animal welfare. It will take some time to really get to the bottom of these cuts, Madam Speaker. Have only just have a look at the budget yesterday, but it is fair to say that there are many Territory losers out of this first attempt of a budget by the CLP. This is a government with no vision and no idea about what Territorians actually need and care about. Strong economy that supports everyone, including our most vulnerable Territorians and our most remote Territorians, should also go hand in hand. But the first budget of the CLP government puts investment in prisons well above investment in jobs and economic growth, in social cohesion and community development, in a better, brighter, healthier, stronger Territory for all. This budget is a missed opportunity for the Northern Territory on community safety, which was an absolute priority for Territorians, as we all know. They want to see people who do the wrong thing face the consequences. But community safety is much more than just the short-term band-aid solutions or quick fixes that put more people on a path to criminalisation and reoffending. Community safety is about investing in our young people so that they can thrive. It is about setting people on a path to become successful and contributing members of our community. It is about crime prevention in the first place, early intervention and correctional rehabilitation. The CLP has missed the mark on addressing the root causes of crime and serious issues within our justice system that are fueling repeat offending. Territory Labor has been very clear. If you pose a risk to the community, you should not be granted bail. But by being on bail and serving a sentence should be a pathway. This should not be a pathway to future offending. That only happens when governments fail to invest in programs that break the cycle of crime. Strong governments make tough decisions, not just to punish, but to prevent. That means investing in early intervention, rehabilitation, and programs to support people to change the very course of their lives. This is how we will deliver here in the Territory the longer-term resolutions to preventing crime, to creating safer communities right across the Northern Territory. And on this front, Madam Speaker, the CLP government is failing Territorians. Their refusal to invest in meaningful crime prevention will have consequences that reach well beyond this budget cycle. If the CLP believes its decisions aren't contributing to the Territory's rising crime rates, then it's not just out of touch, it is delusional. It is an incredibly disappointing approach from a government who talked up strong and talked up big in the last election to already be out of ideas 9 months in. out of care and out of touch for Territorians, as evidenced by the Treasurer's more interested in casting a lure than knuckling down and doing the hard work a Treasurer should do. Every bit of evidence around the world, Madam Speaker, points to the fact that a punitive-only approach is likely to create more problems for our community in the long run, putting more people into the cycle of crime. Even the acting police commissioner said, "We can't arrest our way out of this problem." Madam Speaker, what this budget is completely and utterly failing to do is to provide investment around the social determinants to reduce crime beyond what our former Labor government already banked into the budget. Those opposite talk about addressing the root causes, but it is pretty clear they have no idea what this really means. Well, only now, 9 months in, we're starting to hear them articulate perhaps some type of understanding. Madam Speaker, those opposite talk about addressing the root causes of crime, but we're yet to see what programs they say will make the difference. That's largely because they're all about band-aid solutions, quick fixes to look good and to sound good on a media release or in a press grab. Madam Speaker, we all know here in this House there are no quick fixes. These challenges are long-term and they need long-term solutions. Addressing them requires sustained and meaningful effort, not flashy press releases. It requires strong partnership with community, with the federal government, with our local government and those in the community sector in particular, when it comes to supporting elders and everyone who has a role to play in this space. Madam Speaker, we have seen multiple government backbenchers just in the last few weeks break ranks to talk about the concerns of crime in their own electorates within recent months under their own government. But unfortunately for them, there are no answers in this budget for them or their constituents or any of ours in the crossbench and opposition when it comes to preventing crime, for rehabilitating people and getting people out of the cycle of crime. One hugely missed opportunity, Madam Speaker, is the Nightcliff Police Station. This was the Chief Minister's chance to fully commit to staffing that facility after the horrific incident experienced recently, which triggered the urgent callback to Parliament and the opposition's good faith and good hands in following the government through their urgent amendments to legislation. The community of Nightcliff and indeed Darwin and Palmerston have called for this. This is the Chief Minister's chance through her Treasurer to put this to rest and to create a safer community. Or, if that's too hard for the Madam Speaker, the opposition suggests turning the Nightcliff Police Station into a community safety hub, one that is shared with police and service providers that create the opportunity which the Nightcliff community and many of those who love to be in the Nightcliff community can all access as needed. But it takes the leadership and the bravery and courage to do that, and this opportunity was missed, Madam Speaker. Of the $495 million committed to corrections this year, how much is actually going towards rehabilitating prisoners so they are less likely to commit offences when they come out of jail? A measly $4.2 million for domestic and family violence programs, Madam Speaker, when we know a majority of people who are serving sentences in the Northern Territory's correctional services are there because it was related to family and domestic violence. Madam Speaker, overall, that's 0.8% of the prison's budget. Less than 1% aimed at getting offenders back onto a good track, a better path, and changing their lives. Madam Speaker, the CLP likes to talk about the root causes a lot. Now that they hopefully know what the root causes are, when it comes to acting on them, they still do not provide answers to the community. This time last year, Madam Speaker, in her budget reply speech, Leah Finocchiaro, our now Chief Minister, said that a future CLP government would change the law to make it mandatory for domestic violence offenders to attend behavioural change programs while serving their prison sentence. Madam Speaker, the government has now before the House the Domestic Violence Legislation Amendment right now, and there is absolutely nothing in those amendments about legislating for behaviour change programs. Hopefully this is an oversight and it will be amended by the government before the debate comes ahead. Madam Speaker, if the CLP had included an amendment along those lines, then I believe we would be behind it, but it's simply not there. They still have time to make this change. Madam Speaker, what's also missing is increased funding to tackle domestic, family and sexual violence prevention. The 2025 budget is pretty much on par with former Labor government's funding in the 2024 budget. We've been trying to get to the bottom of the CLP's claims that they are increasing domestic violence funding by $36 million. Now we will finally have the answer. It's not true. The Territory Labor opposition wants to keep working with the government when it comes to supporting the domestic violence sector around ensuring it is properly resourced and locally driven with community solutions. We are, of course, pleased that the government is continuing to invest in tackling domestic violence to the same level as the previous Labor government was, but it is extremely disappointing that they continue to cut the sector and the community out of those very important critical conversations when it comes to how best that money can be spent. Madam Speaker, the CLP continue to ignore the evidence and all the hard work that has already happened in this space. They've decided they know best. Domestic violence experts are locked out of the conversation. Madam Speaker, we all know that to tackle domestic violence, the partnerships around our community should be and should always be the priority for the best approach. This is not patronising, Madam Speaker. This is not from a everyone knows best in this House approach. This is to an approach of listening to experts and the people who deal with day in and day out the horrific impact of domestic, family and sexual violence in the Northern Territory, to make a change to the real people in the Territory who are experiencing this horrifying and plaguing violence. Madam Speaker, we are yet to see the government commit to the 35 recommendations of the coronial recommendations following the tragic domestic violence deaths of 5 Territory women. When talking about the roadmaps, those recommendations are a very clear and stepped out and precise roadmap to tackling this horrendous domestic violence scourge. Yet the CLP government has largely cast them aside. We have offered to be part of the bipartisan delegation, along with the crossbench members of the Northern Territory Parliament, to go to Canberra and to argue for more funding to address domestic violence and make sure once and for all the Territory is need-based funded in this area. So far, the Chief Minister has been silent on this truly unique opportunity of unified Territory parliamentarians standing up for the whole of the Territory together, regardless of politics. Chief Minister, when will you use your voice so that we can stand behind you and support you and further the work of Territory? This is the time. When the newly elected Albanese Labor government is in, or they are now, we will offer our support to you, Chief Minister. Partnerships with the sector and the community is what we need across all 3 tiers of government. It is critical when it comes to thinking about the big issues we must all tackle together. Unfortunately, this budget just doesn't seem to get it. Madam Speaker, when it comes to community safety, police officers are certainly finding out the hard way that talk is cheap when it comes to the CLP. Over and over, the Chief Minister promised our police her unconditional support, but then turned around and put a measly 3% pay rise on the table for the EBA. The budget papers confirmed that, Madam Speaker, yesterday. And that's all there is for police and other public sector workers when they come to negotiate their EBAs with this CLP government. At the time when violent crime is on the rise and the most recent police statistics absolutely support that, the Chief Minister, who is also our Police Minister, has turned her back on police when it comes to shouldering much of the responsibility around law and order and the agenda the CLP have. This is a far cry from the unconditional support that the Chief Minister promised when she was in opposition. Madam Speaker, we acknowledge that the CLP has maintained the funding injected into the budget by the former Labor government to support an additional 200 police officers, as well as to upgrade the Joint Emergency Services Communication Centre. And we support that, and we still do today. Madam Speaker, both of these were key recommendations of the Police Resource Review, and it is good to see that the CLP is continuing with these critical community safety initiatives, as they should. What is less clear, Madam Speaker, is that where the rest of the review recommendations are at. The Chief Minister said in her budget reply speech last year when she was in opposition that she would follow the former Labor government and implement the 15 recommendations. We haven't heard from her since about the other recommendations, and particularly around measures to improve the police force's culture and strengthen wellbeing and welfare for our police officers. We know the Police Minister has had to be shamed into agreeing to an inquiry into senior hiring practices in the force. 2 months later and one Police Commissioner down, we have not heard another word about the inquiry from the Chief Minister. We simply don't know if the NT Police, who have experienced their fair share of destabilisation under this CLP government, are getting on with those Police Resource Review recommendations, which are needed now more than ever, Madam Speaker, to bolster attrition and morale across the force. Madam Speaker, I've talked before about the disappointing micro-investment this government is putting into rehabilitating offenders, in choosing instead the punitive-only approach. Sadly, this budget confirms that the CLP is taking the same approach when it comes to children and young people. Despite the mountain of evidence concerning the harm caused to children by incarceration, the CLP government stubbornly refuses to invest in any meaningful way in prevention, early intervention or therapeutic supports that will actually help our Territory kids get back on track. This time last year, 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 said her future government would immediately establish boot camps in Alice Springs and Darwin. And I quote, Madam Speaker, "This will give the courts a place to send youth offenders as part of sentencing," end quote. This is what she said at the time, this time last year. We are yet to see any signs of these boot camps in either Darwin or Alice Springs. And this time last year, the Chief Minister, when she was in opposition, said that her future government would make diversion programs mandatory for young offenders. We are yet to see any sign of that either, Madam Speaker. The only diversion program the CLP can lay claim to is the circuit breaker program, which they often reference when they're trying to deflect questions about their lack of action on domestic violence. Again, this is a recycled Labor program, rebranded as the co-responder model, but it's great to see the CLP continuing with it. But we know the community wants to see more investment and more effort in preventing youth crime and diverting children away from the bad behaviour that we see. Madam Speaker, there needs to be a greater focus on skills, training and employment pathways to give kids options and opportunity, and this needs to be front and centre of what the CLP speaks about. And I know that the CLP will say, it's only been 8 or 9 months, give us time, as they always do, but this is a real concern right across the Northern Territory. And since coming to government, the CLP have not uttered a word at all about these things. And 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎, the Chief Minister, promised she would do this 12 months ago. Not a single word. So we have to presume that they have absolutely no intention of meeting any of these commitments. They just sounded good at the time. The reality is, Madam Speaker, that the Chief Minister's one-note approach to governing means that, beyond locking people up, adults or kids, she has no answers to improving community safety and will not let her team lead in this space either. Madam Speaker, when it comes to education, we welcome the CLP's commitment to the agreement which Labor struck with the Albanese Labor government to fully fund every Northern Territory public school. That investment is in the budget papers, and we congratulate the CLP for continuing this work. It is absolutely vital to ensure that every child across the Territory has the best possible access to the education, no matter where they live. In a budget reply last year, I note the then opposition leader and now Chief Minister, 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 said, a CLP government would also invest in expanding school-based policing and increase access to special education for children and teenagers with disabilities. And I would appreciate it, and my team and I would like to see what the CLP could point out to us where those items are in the budget papers, because they don't appear to be there as a new initiative. Madam Speaker, these are critical investment areas which affect all of our electorates, and it is disappointing that the Chief Minister hasn't met her promise in these areas when it comes to delivering the first CLP budget. Our Labor opposition supports the funding to increase more school counsellors in our 153 Northern Territory Government schools, but would like to receive more detail on this from the CLP government on how they will actually achieve this and what it'll look like for our schools on the ground. Madam Speaker, when it comes to infrastructure, the Treasurer has been flagging for some time now that he intended to cut infrastructure funding from his own department. And I spoke about it earlier, but it does bear the need to discuss again, Madam Speaker, as we certainly didn't expect the cuts to be so deep and far-reaching as what was announced yesterday. And Madam Speaker, we know that the Treasurer can talk about cash splash and programs, and he likes to try and muddy the water on this one, but the numbers in the books do not lie. He has ripped $131 million out of the infrastructure budget. And yesterday, here in this House, he avoided answering details to questions that we asked about which projects will be cut from the CLP infrastructure budget because of this decision. But I'm sure you'll get those answers ready for us in estimates, Treasurer. And hopefully the Treasurer spends his time properly preparing for estimates rather than fishing on taxpayers' time. Madam Speaker, what we know is that this budget is an incredibly short-sighted move with significant flow-on impacts to businesses, to jobs, to families and to all of our communities. The Treasurer will not give us the specifics, but what roads, schools, hospitals and community development projects will simply not be built or upgraded now because of your decision. This is a bad move for the Territory economy and for the benefits that our Territory community would reap. Madam Speaker, like so much of what the CLP does, this budget is all slogans with no substance. It manages to hook Territorians in with more debt while delivering significant and widespread funding cuts and offering no clear economic vision for the future. It is a disappointing budget for Territorians who were promised so much more from their Chief Minister and have now received so little. No wonder the Treasurer went fishing, Madam Speaker, or perhaps was told by the Chief Minister to stay on the boat and get out of the way. Madam Speaker, in talking about CLP's missed opportunities, just yesterday we saw the Northern Territory Indigenous Business Network, or NTIBN, put out their own media release. And Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity to support some of the areas that are called for by the NTIBN from their media release, which states they call on the NT government to commit to a whole-of-government Aboriginal economic development strategy with measurable targets led by Aboriginal people for Aboriginal people. Expand and enforce Aboriginal procurement policy targets across all agencies, ensuring not just contract awards, but real engagement with Aboriginal businesses in delivery. And support Aboriginal participation in emerging industries, including renewable energy, digital services, construction and bush foods, through the co-design development plans and investment partnerships. Madam Speaker, so far, the details are grim with the CLP's first budget, but overall, we would say underwhelming and not hitting the mark. Madam Speaker, we have far too many questions that remain unanswered in the detail from the CLP. They keep getting snagged on that detail, actually, Madam Speaker. But as I said when I first became the opposition leader, Madam Speaker, my team and I stand ready to support further funding, investment, policies and programs that will support Territorians for the better. We will remain constructive, but we will also keep the CLP government to account when it comes to the promises and the commitments they made in delivering for Territorians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to reply to the CLP government's budget address. And it is deeply disappointing that the country Liberal government's first budget has once again fallen short of what Territorians deserve and expect from a new government. Madam Speaker, this is a budget that lacks vision, lacks compassion and lacks a commitment to addressing the most pressing issues in our community. Madam Speaker, if it is a genuine concern that the government's most single-minded focus is on a few priorities, cost of living is absolutely critical, then we all must work to address it. But, Madam Speaker, we are seeing in this budget a government that is ignoring environmental protections, ignoring the lived experience of individuals and experts who work in various sectors across the Northern Territory, including the domestic violence sector and the environment. Madam Speaker, through this week, we've heard the government sing the praises of the budget and how it will reduce crime across the Territory so we can have a stronger and safer community. Fair enough, that's what Territorians want, and that's what the opposition wants as well. However, this government, Madam Speaker, has yet to realise that their strategy of arresting and jailing those who commit crime will not yield in those results by itself. We absolutely need to continue to invest in therapeutic solutions. What this budget offers, Madam Speaker, is a band-aid solution to much bigger problems. The Territory will continue to have high rates of crime and domestic violence if we do not invest our money correctly. And this budget shows that the government has no clue when it comes to making those real changes. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory is plagued by domestic violence. It is a shame. It is an issue that both the opposition and the government want to address and find a solution for. I believe, and I have said in this chamber before, that we should all be doing the work, government, my caucus and the crossbench, to go to Canberra, Madam Speaker, and ask our federal colleagues for the much-needed additional funding to better address domestic and family violence in the Northern Territory. In the last 9 months, Madam Speaker, nearly everyone in this chamber has passionately spoken about the effects of DV and the effects it has on our communities and in their own lives. No one here is immune to the effects of domestic violence. And I will admit, Madam Speaker, that some of the lived experiences and stories from members in this chamber gave me hope that as a group of MLAs, we're all on the same page when it comes to overcoming domestic violence. Now, Madam Speaker, I am happy that after months of deflections from the Minister of the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence about what this government is doing regarding domestic violence and refusing to talk about the rollout of the funding to the sector, we are seeing where the much-needed funding is going. It is welcome to see that finally money will be going towards DV, services that can breathe a sigh of relief as they're assured funding for another year, so they continue to provide vital services to some of the Territory's most vulnerable. However, Madam Speaker, big questions still remain about how this DV funding has been allocated and how the sector has been included, Madam Speaker. How have they been consulted? The sector has already had its doubts about whether or not these outcomes will achieve the results so desperately needed in this space, given the government has made decisions unilaterally without consulting those on the front lines and the victims themselves. Madam Speaker, late last year, Coroner Elizabeth Armitage, after nearly a year of investigating the deaths of Kuman Rabanja, Kumanjay Haywood, Ms Ruk and Ms Yunipingu, presented her findings to the public about how the government and DV sector can work together to make real and lasting changes when it comes to reducing the rates of domestic and family violence in the Territory. Coroner Armitage gave government a roadmap of what needs to be done to start making real changes in domestic violence here in the Northern Territory. Unfortunately, the government has chosen to not follow that roadmap entirely. They have invested in some measures that address the Coronial's recommendations, but not all of them have received a budget allocation, Madam Speaker. And the implementation of all of the 35 recommendations is needed if we are to seriously address domestic and family violence in the Territory. So much of the DV money is going to other agencies, like corrections, and while I absolutely support investment into offender rehabilitation, it should be coming from the corrections budget, not taken from services supporting at-risk women and children that are already struggling under the growing number of demand. This is a piecemeal approach. It does not match the scale of the problem or the community's expectations. Madam Speaker, this government says it's focused on early intervention and prevention. We've already heard it every sittings since the CLP came into government. It turns out that they are referring to programs that started under the former government that have been rebranded, for example, the much-spruiked circuit breaker program, which was just the co-responder model by another name. It's unfortunate that they continue to point to this program as a domestic violence success story when it's actually a diversion and supporting young people at risk. Yet the CLP has chosen to invest $6.6 million of DV money into this program. I'm not saying, Madam Speaker, that those kids who go through the circuit program don't need that support, because they do. However, it's coming at the cost of the domestic and family violence sector and the women and families who deserve well-funded frontline services, services that heal the violence of today, as well as stopping the cycle for future generations. Madam Speaker, $36 million into the sector is good, and I thank the government for that contribution. But more thought could have been put into where the money needed to go, making a lasting impact. Madam Speaker, was the DV sector consulted about the DV budget? That is something I'd like to know, and I know that the DSV sector would also like to know. I'd like to also know, Madam Speaker, that the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Advisory Group that was axed, perhaps if the forum was part of the DV budget allocation discussions, some thought might have been put into the allocations. Madam Speaker, there is no money in the budget for the establishment of a Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence peak body. Again, an important recommendation that has been made, that has been spoken about for some time, an important step to overcoming domestic and family violence. There is no money for the Domestic Violence Death Review, Madam Speaker. Again, another important recommendation that has been ignored by this government. Madam Speaker, this government has repeatedly claimed that their first budget is a law and order budget that tackles the root causes of crime. Yet programs and initiatives that have shown real outcomes in changing behaviours of those caught in the cycle of the justice system have had their funding cut, including the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, which has lost $2 million, Madam Speaker. When we speak about the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, Madam Speaker, and you look at the budget papers, there has been a reduction of $2 million. There is no money in the infrastructure programs to turn over a new alternative to custody facility in the Northern Territory. There is no money to turn over new work camps across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. This tells us that this government is not serious about upholding the principles and the values of the Northern Territory's Aboriginal Justice Agreement, Madam Speaker. The cut to funding for the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is a concerning signal from the government about its commitment to justice reform. There is also no funding, as I've said, for alternative to custody facilities or new correctional work camps. This is a slap in the face to the community organisations and advocates who have long championed progressive reform in the justice space. And this shows that this government, the CLP government, has no real plans when it comes to breaking the cycle of crime in the Territory besides locking offenders up. Madam Speaker, a mindset made clear by the Attorney-General this week was when she announced that this government doesn't care about the trauma that jails can cause perpetrators. What this means is she doesn't care that jails further entrench criminal behaviour and keep people in a cycle of reoffending. It's incredibly short-sighted. Madam Speaker, when we talk about the environment, we talk about something that affects the lives of every Territorian. Environmental protections are fundamental to ensuring the Territory's future sustainability. Yet this budget reflects a failure to invest adequately in these protections. The reduction in water investment is particularly concerning, Madam Speaker. The Territory Water Plan is one of the biggest budget losers. It is a comprehensive plan built on consultation with communities, with industries, reflecting insights, concerns and aspirations of all Territorians when it comes to the protection, quality and security of water in the Northern Territory. We know, Madam Speaker, that the Minister for the Environment doesn't care about water. When it comes to water, he's shown his true colours are aligned with the values of the CLP and would rather give water to his mates than protect it for future generations. This budget cut, Madam Speaker, also goes to looking in other areas. Yet this budget cut of funding to the 𝙍𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 wastewater management strategy, water resources and security. This is short-sighted thinking, jeopardises both the environment and the capacity for agencies to meet their basic responsibilities when it comes to making sure Territorians have their basic human rights of access to safe drinking water are fulfilled. I could go on, Madam Speaker, and talk about this, but there are so many other areas to talk about. When we talk about the lack of investment being seen by this government in the arts is deeply upsetting, particularly given the vital role the creative community plays in fostering cultural pride, community connection and economic growth. How can this government boast the success of our festival seasons and yet not provide much-needed funding to artists and communities that perform the work at those festivals? The Territory's artists deserve better. Madam Speaker, I must also acknowledge the lack of new money for Aboriginal Ranger grants. Madam Speaker, this is absolutely important. Rangers do an amazing job across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. They help with fire seasons, creating fire breaks. They help with maintaining country. They help with invasive weed species, Madam Speaker. The Aboriginal Ranger Grant Program was an absolutely integral and successful program here in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. That was a program that was a commitment of the last Labor government for a 4-year process. During the 2024 election campaign, Madam Speaker, certainly Labor committed that if we were re-elected, that program would be renewed. I also note, Madam Speaker, that it was the CLP government that made the same commitment at the last election, Madam Speaker. And what we've seen in this budget is absolute, complete betrayal of an election commitment that the CLP made to Aboriginal Rangers across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. The CLP government said, we will honour that commitment. We will provide $12 million of funding to the Aboriginal Ranger grant programs if we are elected. And they lied, Madam Speaker, because we've seen today, we've heard from the Environment Minister that they are not going to continue that important funding, that they have broken that election promise, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I just want to quote the Treasurer, who at the time was the Shadow Minister for Parks and Rangers, Bill Yan, who said in the Central Australian today, that an elected CLP government will match the election commitment made by Labor. The CLP remains committed to the Aboriginal Ranger Grants program, and if we are elected, we will fully fund the program with $12 million over 4 years, Mr Yan said. And Madam Speaker, I seek leave to place this on the parliamentary record.
Is leave granted? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leave is granted.
That is an important matter to put on the public record to demonstrate that the Environment Minister, Josh Burgoyne, the member for Breitling, who continually comes in here and says he's the most green credentialed person of the government, that he cares about the environment, is absolutely telling porky pies. He has removed environmental protections. He has removed merits review processes. He is now changing water allocations. He has defunded environmental groups. He has caused absolute carnage to the Northern Territory's environment, and then he comes in this budget and strips Indigenous rangers. For a party that talks big on providing economic opportunity and job creation, you have a big F for fail. Cutting ranger funding means people will lose jobs. People in remote communities will lose jobs because of your cuts. It shows that this government, the CLP government, don't actually care about people living in remote communities. Because if they did, the member for Barkly, who is also the housing minister, would have stood up in cabinet and said, "You're not touching that $12 million, but he didn't, because we've seen the cut today. When there are bushfires, like the member for Barkly talks about, like the Environment Minister, Josh Burgoyne, who talks about the devastating bushfires that went through the West Max, who do you think was out there helping? Aboriginal rangers. Who are you doing a disservice today? Aboriginal rangers. Cutting their funding causes harm for everyone in the Northern Territory. There are not additional people out there to help with fire breaks. There are not additional people out there to help with the removal of gamba grass, of buffel grass across the Northern Territory. And it's because of you. You could not provide the funding. Now, the member for Nelson loves to tell a good porcupine, and he'll say that the funding was cut. The funding was part of an election commitment for 4 solid years, and at the end of that commitment, Labor had said we will renew that again for another 4 years. The CLP, the Treasurer now, the former Shadow Minister for Parks and Wildlife, Bill Yan, the member for Namatjira, a remote member, actually said publicly, no, we're going to fund it. We're actually going to agree to Labor's election commitment and we're going to fund it. What does that equal, member for Nelson, Deputy Chief Minister? A broken election promise. You have broken another promise to Territorians. You just love breaking promises. You thought that no one would pick up on this. Well, they have. And I can tell you firsthand, rangers across the Northern Territory are absolutely disappointed in this CLP government. They are absolutely disappointed that they are having their funding cut. It is absolutely disgraceful. You should be doing better. You want to create jobs, don't cut jobs. Cutting funding will cut jobs. It will mean loss of jobs for Aboriginal rangers across the Northern Territory. It was one thing that we could actually say this government is actually doing something proactive in the Aboriginal affairs space, but you cut it. Now let's move on to housing, because we've had the member for Fanny Bay, we've had the member for Karama, the member for Drysdale, all get up and talk about ghettos. Ghettos, ghettos, ghettos. Well, your government is creating more ghettos with a $100 million cut from repairs and maintenance. What do you think that equals? More derelict houses in your electorates, because your government hasn't put enough money in the budget to fix them. So what does that mean for people across the Northern Territory? More empty houses in suburbs of Alice Springs, because the government is going to turn around and say, we've got no money to fix them, so members just put up with them and leave them, and you're going to end up with more spaces in our suburbs that are going to be left derelict, left damaged and not fixed. What does that mean in the bush? That means that people in the bush are going to go months without repairs when wear and tear has caused things to break. That's what that's going to mean. It's a direct hit for people in the Territory. And the Minister for Remote Housing, again, doesn't have a big voice in the budget cabinet room. A $100 million cut. All of your members of the government are going to be jumping up and down, kicking and screaming when you've got all these empty houses in your electorate and they look absolutely terrible, and then people are going in there and squatting. You've got no one to blame but yourselves. You cut $100 million from the budget. We have to go back to Alice Springs in the suburbs of Breitling, Araluen, Namatjira and 𝙍𝙬𝙈, and we'll see direct the impact of your failure to deliver in the housing space. There's limited money for community housing and social housing. And you're going to then stand up and jump up and down. I can bet your bottom dollar there will be a Treasurer's advance and there will be a mid-year budget, because you're going to have to fix the problem that you have created, and that is by not funding housing appropriately. We're seeing it clear as day, Madam Speaker. We absolutely need to see that investment going forward. No one is denying that. The Minister for Housing has made it very clear about people being accountable for their actions and the appropriate processes to get revenue back into housing. But by simply just tying your hands behind your back and saying, we're just going to leave those empty. Or, Madam Speaker, what that says is that $100 million cut to repairs and maintenance and derelict housing is code for CLP. It's ugly, it's damaged. Oh, we don't have any money. Oh, we're going to sell it and not replenish housing stock. And by that default situation, we're going to try and move the problem somewhere else. That is essentially what this does. So I actually think that this $100 million cut is a deliberate attempt, because there's probably a number of members in this Assembly who are whinging about public housing tenants. And rather than work with them, and rather than support them, and rather than actually try and get in and do intensive support, just let the house get down to a terrible state, let it go empty, let it go derelict, and then we'll either knock it down or we'll sell it, because you're not going to have the money to fix it. Now, Madam Speaker, we're seeing again $300,000 cut to the Anti-Discrimination Commission. We know that this government has its eyes on the Anti-Discrimination Commission and the Act, and they want to do work there. We're absolutely seeing that. That is going to hinder the Anti-Discrimination Commission's ability to be able to provide important protections for vulnerable Territorians, Madam Speaker. And again, we are seeing these cuts right across the place. This is serious stuff, Madam Speaker. Absolute serious. I've spoken about those cuts to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the direct impact that that's going to have. Now, I know a few members of this Assembly have actually had the opportunity to go to the ATC in Alice Springs and in Groote Eylandt. Fantastic, great. No money in this budget for another alternative to custody, another place for the court to send people to help people get their life back on track and change. There's money in the budget to expand the prison estate, but there's no money that I can see for new work camps, for getting people out, setting up work camps like the successful Barkly work camp, great work camp, important. We've heard in this chamber people talking about the money for peacekeeping and mediation. That is not the work of this government. Absolutely not. That is the work of Indigenous Affairs Minister Mullenderi McCarthy renegotiating the Northern Territory remote Aboriginal investment. That's what that money is. That is money that was absolutely created in response to calls from myself and the member for Mulka around needing to have greater peacekeeping measures in our remote communities and looking at how we can de-escalate situations in our community. Now, we absolutely know and acknowledge, Madam Speaker, that I think it is 71 or 73% of the Territory's budget is Commonwealth funding. We understand that there are challenges around self-generated revenue in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, and we absolutely work or willing to work with the government on innovative ways that do it, but they don't come at the cost of providing important services to all Territorians, because that is absolutely important. The NT rate is a significant portion of money coming into the Northern Territory each and every year, and it does provide money for police. It does provide additional funding for peacekeeping, mediation, for health services, for education, and it is an important program. And we absolutely are very thankful that that agreement has been signed again. We're very thankful for the Commonwealth Government coming on board with the former Labor government to renegotiate the education agreement so that we could absolutely see Territory schools fully funded across the Northern Territory. There has been a long-standing conversation between the Northern Territory Government and the Commonwealth around appropriate baseline funding. That continues. Important conversations to have. Certainly, Madam Speaker, these are all important areas. But again, we have seen significant decreases in important areas when, again, we know how important water is for each and every Territorian. We're seeing significant cuts by the CLP government in this space. It is harmful. We're seeing a deduction of support and resourcing when it comes to the Territory's screen industry. Now, I'm from the beautiful place of Central Australia, as there are many members in this chamber who are. We come from the place that produces probably some of, if not Australia's most talented Aboriginal filmmakers, along with so many other Centralians who are absolutely incredible at what they do. Having a strong and functional screen territory is absolutely important, and we need to do it. We have heard calls in the media from people from the screen industry so disappointed, pleading with this government to not reduce the support and the resourcing for them. We also see and hear those calls have been ignored. So the Minister for Tourism can stand up here and smile and say she's going to watch all these amazing films like The Territory. But in actual fact, by her own work, she is reducing the support and the resource to produce amazing quality productions like that, Madam Speaker. That's what we're getting with this budget. Now, I want to acknowledge that in this budget, there are a number of key roads that the government have spooked. They're Commonwealth-funded roads, and we were able to negotiate when we were in government the funding partnership between those, because in other jurisdictions it is a lot higher, the state contribution, than the territories. And we were able to negotiate, back then it was an 80-20%, so that these roads that we're seeing across the territory are important roads. They're connecting roads, they're industry roads, they're community roads. They are important roads to link families together. But we mustn't forget there needs to be money in the infrastructure budget so that the Minister, the Treasurer, the Member for Namatjira can make sure that roads are being looked after in the bush. Roads like the 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙑 Road, roads like the Papunya and Kintore roads, roads like the Sandover. These are all important roads for thousands of Territorians. There needs to be money in the budget to make sure that they can continue to access those roads in and out of town, because it is absolutely important for them to be able to commute in and out. But we know when these roads are not looked after, people become stuck. They become stuck in our towns, they become stuck with family, they become stuck in community. And that can help sometimes perpetuate those issues that we see in our community, because countrymen want to go home, but these roads are not good. And when you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a big flash car, so you see these cars get worn out really quickly. We need to continue that rolling investment on these remote roads, Madam Speaker, because it is really, really important. We're hearing from community members in Santa Teresa community that the Territory Government is yet to actually start work on the Santa Teresa Road, a road that Marion Scrimminger, the member for Yingiya, got money for, to do that road, to fix that road. That road will be sealed not by the success of this government, Madam Speaker, but by the success of the hard work and advocacy of Marion Scrimminger, the member for Yingiya. Madam Speaker, understanding Order 43, I can see that everyone's really happy for me to continue, so I might ask for an extension.
Is an extension granted?
Thank you.
It is granted, Member for 𝙍𝙬𝙈. Everyone wants to continue to listen to your speech.
Thank you. I know that the Assembly is very excited. So I can pick up on the interjection, so excited. Thank you, government members. Thank you. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, this is important, and I do absolutely, again, acknowledge the contribution by the government in the DV space. It's absolutely important. It's absolutely welcomed. There's absolutely a trip that we should be all taking to lobby Canberra for more money for domestic and family violence. Absolutely, Madam Speaker. But we need to make sure that we don't forget people in the bush, because the bush deserve the same level of access to services as people living in towns, in cities and areas. We want to see that investment. We want to see investment in homelands. We want to see investment in outstations. We want to see investment in remote communities. We don't want to see people waiting long periods of time to get their air conditioners fixed when it is 40 degrees outside. We don't want to see community members calling the Department of Housing, reporting when taps have been leaking because the washers have broken inside them or worn out, and they're waiting weeks to get their tap replaced, Madam Speaker. And I know that these are true stories because I have had my own countrymen from my beautiful electorate of 𝙍𝙬𝙈 ring me up and say, Japananga, we're still waiting for housing to fix our taps. So then I write to the Housing Department to help try and move that on. And then they come back a week later. Japananga, I'm still waiting for that tap. Now, if the Environment Minister was serious about water security and the Housing Minister was serious about responding to repairs and maintenance requests, they would be getting onto that quick smart. Imagine how much water we could save if we had responsive repairs and maintenance being done in our remote communities. Not a cut of $100 million or thereof, but imagine if we were doing that work. Madam Speaker, the Territory actually has a good story to tell when it comes to the future of housing, because there is that National Partnership Agreement where the government have signed on to build 270 houses a year. That is a big milestone, but I'm going to give some credit where credit is due. I think that if there was anyone over on that side of the government who could actually put in the hard work and get it done, is my mate from Barkly. Oh. I said I'd give credit where it was due, and I think when it comes to housing, he's passionate. I did say to the member for Barkly, old boy, make sure you don't just make Barkly beautiful, come over to 𝙍𝙬𝙈 too. So I am looking forward to seeing a number of houses opened and handed over to countrymen in 𝙍𝙬𝙈 as part of this National Partnership Agreement. I'm looking forward to the member for Barkly sharing the opportunity to hand over some of those houses with the wonderful Marion Scrimgeour or the wonderful Senator Mullendeary McCarthy, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, who is co-funding this program, because this is how we change lives, building more houses. Because when we build more houses, we provide more opportunity. And, Madam Speaker, this is particularly important when it comes to child protection. I'm not sure if it's the case anymore, but when I was the Housing Minister a fair while ago, we had an agreement in place across Territory families, when housing and families were together, that we tried to prioritise housing allocations for people who worked, for people who were looking after a senior or who wanted to bring a senior back home to community and out of aged care facilities, for people who had lots of children to make sure that they had a home for the first time, where they each had a bedroom or they could share a room and they could get a good night's sleep so they could go to school the next day. And importantly, the next part, Madam Speaker, was we were able to work across and see that when we were able to allocate a house to a community member who was able to be a kinship carer, we were able to complete the reunification process of a child who was in the out-of-home care system because they had a safe, secure and affordable home in a remote community with their family to help continue the love, the care for that young person. So it is incredibly important. The Northern Territory Correctional Services is a big part of the budget. It's been the big part of the budget for a number of years now, and they do a fantastic job. They absolutely do. I am concerned that I'm hearing from a number of correctional services officers that they're considering leaving because they don't feel safe going to work in the current climate. Now, I've said to them, look, there's money in the budget. You do need to see what that will deliver in terms of capital infrastructure around that area. But what I do realise, and I actually again want to acknowledge the government is investing and continuing on from previous governments of all persuasions over the last 20 years, we need to continue investment into rehabilitation programs. Now, when I was the Correctional Services Minister, we did sign an MOU with Charles Darwin University, and I know that there are a number of people in this chamber who've done a trade. And what we want to do is make sure that we get the foundations ready for people who are in prison to get the appropriate checks and clearances, to get their cards, to be able to go back out and jump in the workforce, to undertake literacy and numeracy. It is important. I am also looking forward to seeing the commitment of this government being rolled out around men's behavioural change programs. Absolutely fantastic programs being delivered in the top end by Catholic Care, and certainly an amazing one being delivered in Central Australia by 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏. Amazing programs, really, really important programs. We've seen the success of them where men who were referred to the program, even when they finish, they want to continue to be involved in that program. They want to continue to bring in other men to be part of that program, and they want to become mentors and take that on. That's incredibly important. I think that there's an opportunity, Housing Minister, for us to look at public housing complexes right across the Northern Territory, and as people do vacate those, we should be looking at working across with the Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, and can we use some of those for transitional accommodation? As women leave shelters, they have nowhere to go. Can we turn some of these complexes in our communities that have become problem complexes to be places where we can transition women from our women's shelters into a secure community that has another caretaker living on site, to see behaviours, to be able to identify when things might be getting tense, might be escalating and might be growing. These are opportunities that we've all got certainly to look at and certainly to put some consideration in. So, Madam Speaker, this is the Country Liberal Party's first budget. I acknowledge that there is, there's a cabinet that's done a lot of work. They've certainly, I guess, had to do a lot of work while the Treasurer was out catching a barra. They've done what they think is a good job. I absolutely can say being in budget cabinet of any government is always hard. You've always got to look at what you can and can't do and what you might have to try and work around to make it, be refined. I actually want to acknowledge that work that the CLP have had to do with their budget. I don't agree with all of it, but I don't have to. We'll see when estimates comes up around how their projections are for the future. This is an opportunity for us to look at that, to see it, and then to see how they can deliver on their commitments with their allocations, noting that there are public servants in the environment space who have reached out and said that there is just not enough money for them to be able to deliver their core functions responsibly at the moment when it comes to baseline data around environmental protections, weed management and water allocations. It is an absolute shame that there has been such a cut to the environment when we have, as he refers to himself, the most green credentialed member of that side cutting that funding. So certainly I know that the people in Breitling will be keeping an eye out. I certainly looked very eagerly at the federal election results in that electorate to see just how well other people's parties were polling against the CLP. So, it should serve as a warning to the member for Breitling to get serious about when it comes to the environment, to get serious when it comes to funding environmental protection organisations to care for country, and to get serious when it comes to positive environmental reform. Clearly, those calls have been ignored to date, but, we live in hope that he might actually listen one day, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on the budget. This is the 9th time that I've spoken on a budget, but this is the first time that it is in a CLP budget. I'd like to start by congratulating the CLP government for doubling the tax revenue from the gambling industry. The NT is a safe haven for gambling companies who come here because the NT government offers low tax and low penalties of misconduct. I understand budget paper 3. This could provide many millions extra to the NT. This increase may not go far enough, but it is important and an improvement given the enormous profits these companies make, and the company and the amount of harm caused. I applaud this step by the government. Madam Speaker, on the surface, there is not much else in the budget for my electorate or Bush electorates to celebrate, but I also note that this government do not appear to have made significant cuts, and this is important. I note that there is a possible cut to the Rangers programs, and this is concerning. This is a program that really needs to be expanded by both levels of government, as we see more activity across the region, and we need to see increased resources and for patrolling the region and for training rangers so they have an increased powers to act. I note this budget is also investing the gas industry. These are big companies with big profits, and they will take their profits out of the NT. This government should not be subsidizing big businesses in this way when our health, education, housing sectors could all use these funds. I also note the continued support for the interpreting and translation services, and go. And again, this is a service that legally needs to be expanded. This is really needs to be expanded. When we talk about education and employment in the region. This is a clear employment pathway for our kids, and there is much demand. All government departments, services, and big businesses such as the Telstra and the banks should be working with the enterprises and interpreters in remote Aboriginal communities. Madam Speaker, I am also concerned about how few kinship placements there are in the NT. This is an area that needs to grow so that we can provide the best care for our kids. Purchased homes based businesses, models continues to grow, and this is not the best outcome. The model needs to shift so that the funding is redirected to family and kinships and cares. With more support, extended family members can help these children, and they need greater care and protection. The Aboriginal children placement principle must be properly supported if we want to see the best outcomes. I don't believe that any government has done this yet. Madam Speaker, I am aware there is no new works in the infrastructure in this budget for the Mulka electorate. I can see a number of revolted works, and some of these revolted works have been on the budget paper for years. My question is, will these revolted works happen during this financial year? The $205 million in the Central Arnhem Road has been announced over several years, and I hope to see significant work being completed this year. This week, the Central Arnhem Highway remains closed. No one can drive out of Gove or out of any of the homelands located along the north end of the Central Arnhem Highway, and none can drive in. There has been more than 600 mils of late rain in the Mulka electorate, while Darwin has been dry. We have had days of rain, and this has also impacted landing strips, and only a limited number of small planes are able to land in many homelands, bringing food supplies, health workers, and teachers. Makarata boarding school, providing secondary education, cannot run run because the students can't be brought in. This is, some of the schools are also struggling to run. The health workers and only responding, health workers are only responding to urgent health care, unable to provide clinics in Go. Many homeland residents are stranded, wanting to get home, but with no way to get there. Madam Speaker, this is a stage. At this stage, the Department of Chief Minister don't know when the road will open again. The 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 homelands has been strong advocating for the 𝙍𝙬 homeland residents. They have helicoptered fuel into several homelands and will last until mid-June. But prior to the government-funded helicopters, 𝙍𝙬 had been calling for help and support to get supplies out of the homelands that had been cut off for some time. Madam Speaker, for 8 years, I have called on the local government focus on the Central Arnhem Highway upgrades from the Nhulunbuy end to 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙑 as a priority. This is so our homeland residents and have access to supplies that all year round. As part of this, Giddish River crossing must be upgraded on every road that comes off the Central Arnhem Highway, including Ramangaring Link Road. And the yearly maintenance is often just a grader passing over. The trucks that use the road and the Central Arnhem Highway gorge out the road, and the grading that follows then creates a road that is lower than the surrounding country, creating pools in the wet season, and the buffalo into enjoy, but these roads become more and more impossible to drive. Gravel should be brought in and to maintain these roads properly. And I asked the question, is this the year that we will see significant roadworks so that our communities are not left stranded next year? I am also concerned that I cannot see mention of infrastructure upgrades for the barge landings in my electorate. For many years, the Labor government had this expenditure budgeted for, but the work has never started. But that doesn't mean that we don't desperately need these upgrades. 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙎 and Ramangaring rely on the weekly barge services for all our supplies and do and so does the 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 and 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙀. These barge landings need significant work to allow the barges to continue to land. I hope that this government is continuing to upload these works, rather. Madam Speaker, this also brings us to cost of living issues, but when the roads are closed, the only way to leave the region is by air. Buying a flight from Gove to Darwin this Friday will cost $1,041 for one-way flight. This is the similar across our communities, ranging from $600 to $75 one way from 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙀 to Darwin, or $835 from Elcho Island to Darwin. These are the costs of living pressures that people in our region face. These are the flight costs for all year round that anyone needing to leave the region urgently, these are the prices we pay. The town of Nhulunbuy also has a very, very high rates and rents, the highest council rates in the NT, and like the whole region, an extreme housing shortage and high fuel and freight costs on all supplies. That is passed on the individuals and businesses. These issues have not been addressed by the NT government, and with the closing of the mine looming, people do not feel that enough work has been done to consult all clans in the region and all communities about what we want to see for the region. And through there continues to be a land ownership issues that must be resolved according to Yolngu law and traditional decision making. For a strong future, we must have all clans involved. Otherwise, we continue the legacy that the mine brought of disempowering Aboriginal people and take away our decision-making rights. Madam Speaker, on cost of living issues, the roads, infrastructure, and new housing, all these that are needed across our communities, but also for our homelands. Our homelands are our safest places to live. They are where our children can grow up strong and confident in their own country. Like myself, growing up in a homeland country for the past few years, I have seen the children from Gartarala homeland graduate graduate school with confidence and pride. This is what can be achieved in every homeland with strong two-way education, and this is overseen by elders. And I hope we will one day see these graduations happening across our region. Madam Speaker, I have been speaking with all the levels of government about new housing for homelands. In these places, our ancestors' spirits are strong and call on us to live a lawful life of respect on country, community, and ourselves. And we live peacefully, knowing we are looked after by the ancestors. Madam Speaker, I can see in this budget that a homeland funding remains the same, and it only addresses limited grants for maintenance. This amount has changed very little in the last 8 years, and yet the cost of supplies and fuel in remote areas has risen enormously. Homeland resources centers are left with less capacity and capability to service homelands each year. This funding amount needs to be urgently reviewed due to increasing costs across the NT. Homelands have the capacity to bring economic independence with the operation of small businesses across our communities. We need to focus on local jobs rather than the industry, rather than the increasing number of 5 hours workers that we are seeing in communities. Madam Speaker, I will continue to call on both levels of government to look at how the $4 billion $4 billion housing agreement can be included. New housing for our homelands. I believe there is a strong commitment to make this happen from all parties. So we must begin to work now on the tenure, on agreements on infrastructure and on design. Also, these things must be happening now. So we can begin to on a pathway for new housing in homelands. Madam Speaker, the high level of GST funding from the federal government comes to the NT to address Aboriginal disadvantage. Within this budget, I would like to see where that money goes. There is a very little transparency on these funds. It should be going going to prison. It should not be going to prison or police. It should be going towards programs that are community-led and should be managed in partnership with Aboriginal communities. This is the number one priority reform in the Closing the Gap agreement, shared decision-making. I cannot see shared decision-making or partnership in this budget, nor are there any plans for it that I can see. This is an enormous problem. Labor had a plan for local decision-making. In the Mulka electorate, our communities were just starting to develop clan-based representative groups that could create partnerships with the government in line with local decision-making. But now with a new government, we are left without to be properly consulted, included, and engaged with the Attorney General is the person who must uphold people's rights and advocate justice for everyone. Her failure to do this is very, very concerning. Madam Speaker, I understand that it has cost $36,000 $3,600 per day to detain young people in detention, which is over $1 million of a year per child. If this money is invested in the community to which the child belongs properly, community-led programs could be delivered to the child and others, giving them a chance to rehabilitate rather than be explored to criminal culture, and that will breed criminal activity. There also needs to be an adequate funding to address facet brain injuries, addiction and trauma. There must be funding that addresses the underlying issues that causes crime, and unless the government has some interest in growing the jails and creating a prison industry with significant amounts of money going to the private companies, then I believe that we should all be working towards lowering the incarceration rates in the NT. And yet the budget is seeking to make incarceration the thing that the NT does the most. We will not be able to know of tourism
Could you just pause, Member for Malka? Yes, Member for Fanny Bay.
I'd just like to request an extension of time for the member for Malka.
Is an extension of time granted? Yes, it is. Please continue, Member for Malka.
Thank you. We would not be able. We would not be known for tourism. We will be known for jailing people, and we will overtake El Salvador as the place with the highest incarceration rates in the world. But we should be investing in alternatives. Madam Speaker, I see the funding for the community courts remain in this budget, and I am pleased that this continues to be supported by the government. But I would like to see the program expanded. Currently, we have a community court in Ramanganing, and I would like to also see this in 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 and 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙀𝙀, and I am certain there are many other communities that want to be part of the community courts. While I see this, there is $2 million less for Aboriginal justice, and the budget paper says that this is because of the finalization of time-limited funding for law and justice groups. I am unsure what this means. The Ramanganing a law and justice group reform for over a number of years, and they are critical, grouping to governing the community. They are elders and leaders from across clan groups. They are responsible representatives of 𝙑𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 law of our systems, and because of this, they hold real authority with the community. They were not elected under the Balanda system and handpicked the government that they are the real leaders, and this is what we need to see in all our communities. I am disappointed to see a drop in funding in this area. We are taking about $1.5 billion law and order budget, and sorry, I'll say that again. We are talking about $1.5 billion law and order budget, and only $8 million for Aboriginal justice. Given that Aboriginal people are highly overrepresented in this justice system, it makes no sense that the Aboriginal justice receives so little. Madam Speaker, over decades, the NT and the federal government have neglected Aboriginal communities in the bush. From this neglect we are seeing increased poverty levels, increased overcrowding levels, and low levels of employment. We are seeing increased crime in the bush, and we are seeing a movement of people into towns. But instead of investing in programs in the bush, this government has decided to spend $1.5 billion on jails and public order that for the most part of the based in urban centres. Madam Speaker, by taking this approach and continuing to invest in the bush, our communities are once again left on the sidelines without the support we need to bring change. This is crippling to our communities and removing our rights to self-determination, and it is guaranteeing that our communities all become less safe instead of solving the problems. The government will be growing the problems. So when I look at the budget, I ask, where is the funding for preventative community-led solutions, such as refugee camps and peacekeeping? Where is the funding for increased services and support in the bush? Where is the budget and funding to tackle poverty? Where is the funding for genuine shared decision-making and self-determination in the bush? Where is the funding for this that will improve our lives and bring equality? These are the areas which will create the most positive impact in the NT, and yet I cannot see them clearly in this budget. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak on the budget. Madam Speaker, despite promises to restore confidence in government and invest in ways that matter most, this budget doubles down on the wrong priorities. Instead of tackling our chronic housing shortage, endemic violence and the lack of social support for many vulnerable community members, it pours public money into fossil fuels and prisons. We cannot accept a budget that subsidises polluters and prisons while cutting essential services that keep communities safe. My first concern is that the CLP is boasting about a record spend on corrections, police and prisons. We're spending $1.34 billion per year on courts, prisons and police. This is not something to be proud of. In fact, it demonstrates the ineffectiveness of their tough-on-crime approach and also a complete lack of understanding of the deeper issue. The headline in the budget is reducing crime, but it should be changed to reacting to crime, because that's all it does. My community desperately wants to see a reduction in crime, but you don't get that by just reacting to it, you get it by preventing it, which is possible if you fund the right things. It's not a good thing that our prisons are overflowing and we are needing to inject hundreds of millions of dollars into increasing prison capacity. It is not a good thing that we are having to hire unqualified private security contractors to staff our prisons. It is not a good thing that we are needing to inject millions of dollars into the justice system to help our courts cope with an overwhelming workload. The CLP are so deeply caught up in their racist, punitive, brutalising, tough-on-crime agenda that they have completely lost touch with the evidence and are leading the Territory down the completely wrong path. Corrections alone has seen an increase in its budget of $126 million to a whopping $495 million per year. This includes an additional $80 million per year to address rising prison numbers, and then $120 million per year thereafter. In contrast, the amount provided for community corrections, where the vulnerable and disadvantaged people facing the justice system are put on a path towards rehabilitation and away from prison, is just $49 million. Each additional individual who is in prison represents not only an enormous cost to the taxpayer, but more importantly, a number of people let down by our community and our justice system. Locking someone up does not rehabilitate the person. Our prisons in the NT are chewing people up and spitting them out. We have the highest recidivism rates in the country, with almost 60% of people returning to prison within 2 years of being released. Locking people up does not make our communities safer. We need to invest in the programs and social safety nets needed to prevent that crime happening in the first place. And locking people up on remand when they have been charged for minor offences is inhumane and a waste of money. We need to be investing in proper bail support services to ensure that people who have been charged with minor offences are kept out of prison. Yes, it is important that violent offenders are kept out of the community. But at the moment, our jails are so full of people remanded on minor offences that our courts are being forced to bail serious offenders. The answer here is not to build more prisons, it's to build more bail accommodation, build more homes and build more community services. I cannot see a single cent in this budget for bail support, and whilst not surprising, the ramifications of this are frankly terrifying. The CLP says that they are investing in addressing the root causes of crime, but all they have announced is a measly $8.3 million for their circuit breaker program, which is only targeted at young offenders. The coronial inquest from November 2024, which should drive the strategy into preventing and reducing domestic, family and sexual violence, is unbudgeted. I will note, however, it is good to see the allocation of $8.6 million over 5 years and $1.5 million ongoing to strengthen the whole of government domestic family and sexual violence coordination mechanism to lead consistent and evidence-based DFSV policy and practice. I will be keenly watching to see what this evidence-based practice looks like and what ongoing consultation will be done. Madam Speaker, the housing shortfall in the NT is a humanitarian crisis. We have the worst overcrowding in Australia. Territorians are waiting up to 10 years for public housing, and we have a homelessness rate that is 12 times the national average. At my office in Nightcliff, myself and my staff are often trying to help people navigate the public housing system, and it is heartbreaking to have to tell people it will be up to 10 years before they can access a home. Every single week, myself and my staff work with people struggling to keep a roof over their head or living in dangerous, dilapidated public housing. Housing is not only a fundamental right, but such an obvious and important solution to so many of the crises we are facing here in the Territory. We know that health and well-being, domestic and family violence, employment, education, community safety and cohesion are so deeply linked to housing. Yet the government is tinkering around the edges of this crisis. I do welcome the $833 million for housing, including $615 million for remote housing, but it is not enough. We need to see a massive increase in investment in building good quality, culturally appropriate and secure housing so we can start to tackle the housing and homelessness crisis and then enjoy the flow-on effects for other issues in our community. Instead of investing in secure housing for our most vulnerable populations, the government is implementing harsher rules and penalties on public housing tenants. Kicking people out of public housing because they can't pay their rent is not going to make them disappear. Victims of crime NT have been clear that evicting people from their homes is not going to reduce crime and antisocial behaviour in public housing. We need to invest in strengthening our social safety net and providing wraparound tenancy services that help people stay in their homes. I've said it before and I will say it again. People need a good home to thrive. You cannot solve domestic and family violence, unemployment, health issues, crime or school attendance if people are homeless or not properly housed. If you were a parent, could you hold down a job, feed your families, get your kids consistently to school and care for your relatives if you didn't have a secure home? This government needs to put itself in the shoes of our most vulnerable people and show some compassion and to approach housing and social services from a place of support, not punishment. Madam Speaker, the CLP government have made it abundantly clear that they work for the fossil fuel industry and not everyday Territorians. They purport to want to restore our iconic Territory lifestyle, but seem intent on allowing their gas industry mates to destroy our unique and precious environment and risk the health of our communities. The petroleum industry pays an embarrassingly small amount of tax and royalties to the NT government. The mining minister had the gall to claim that their taxes and royalties fund important services like health and education before being forced to admit that they pay only $8 million in taxes. We can pay for all the things that Territorians need, a secure home, world-class health, education and nutritious food, if the government had the gumption to make the gas industry pay their fair share. Instead, they've swallowed the gas industry's propaganda, hook, line and sinker. Over the last 4 years, multinational companies have made $149 billion exporting gas that they got for free, which includes $37 billion from the NT. The gas industry pays so little tax and charges us through the nose for our own bloody gas. And despite the fact that the government is throwing everything they have at growing our mining and petroleum industries, expected royalties are forecast to decrease from now until 2029. Why are we throwing hundreds of millions of dollars of public money at an industry with decreasing returns to the public? I want to note my community's immense frustration that the CLP has increased funding to support the toxic, financially irresponsible 𝙍𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎 petrochemical precinct. This is despite increasing evidence that it does not stack up economically and the irrefutable evidence of the health harms to the population of Darwin and in particular Palmerston, and the devastating impacts it will have on our climate and beautiful harbour. I urge the government to abandon this ridiculous venture and work with the federal government to redirect the almost $2 billion of public money committed to 𝙍𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎 to instead invest in clean energy, energy efficiency upgrades for low-income and public housing, improvements to our transmission infrastructure and grid-scale batteries. It's time to put this petrochemical nightmare to bed once and for all and start investing in the future. I also want to call out the fact that under this budget, Territory taxpayers are subsidising consumers to buy our own overpriced gas. We are expected to pay almost $200 million per year in electricity subsidies to manage power costs. It's important that we address the cost of power for households and businesses, but we're propping up the profits of multinational gas industries who rort us for our own gas. Meanwhile, there is no comparable investment in renewables and battery storage. It's 2025, and it is crazy to me that I'm still needing to make the case for investing in renewables. It's been the case for years that renewables are the cheapest form of energy, and that is a fact. We have some of the best solar resources in the world here in the NT, but we are failing miserably to take advantage of them. From what I can see, there is only one fleeting mention of climate change in this whole budget. This is an absolute disgrace. The NT is on the front line of the climate crisis, yet there is no money for climate mitigation or adaptation to be seen. The only mention of emissions reduction is in relation to carbon capture and storage at 𝙍𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎. Carbon capture and storage, or CCS, has failed consistently to deliver results and is just a smokescreen for the gas industry to excuse its ongoing existence. Scientists and engineers the world over have rubbished the ability of CCS to do anything meaningful for emissions reductions. It's another part of the gas lobby that our government is buying hook, line and sinker. Parts of the NT are becoming unlivable already. Alice Springs experienced over 100 days over 40 degrees this summer. There will be no iconic Territory lifestyle if the Territory is unlivable. In its latest blow to our precious environment, the CLP has made cuts across the board for environmental regulation and protection. We've seen a 9% cut to environmental assessment funding and over 30% cuts to water security and water resources. We've seen cuts to ranger programs despite the CLP promising at the election that they would not cut ranger funding. But of course, there is the $6.4 million for the Office of the Territory Coordinator instead. We cannot continue with this development at all costs mentality when our environment, our communities and our health are sacrificed for the benefit of big industry. We need to ensure that economic development is sustainable, inclusive and well regulated. Madam Speaker, this is the largest budget ever delivered in the NT. But what deeply concerns me is the CLP government seems to think greater spending automatically equates to better outcomes. Unfortunately, this is not the case. We need strategic, evidence-based spending that is driven by those working on the front line, experts in the field and people with lived experience. Underlying all these failures in the budget is the way decisions were made, without real consultation. I continually hear community organisations tell me they were not consulted, despite them being the core group working in such areas, which is why it's particularly frustrating to come in here and hear the CLP talk about all the consultations when the very people and organisations are telling me to my face all the time that they are not consulted. I was prepared to congratulate them on their increased funding to reduce domestic, family and sexual violence, something I'm very, very passionate about and keen to see. However, now that I've seen the allocation, I'm concerned that it is not informed by the sector and that it isn't going towards specialist providers. And I do have questions as to why so much of this money is going towards the police and corrections and circuit breakers, which is not a domestic family sexual violence program, rather than to actual prevention and the support services. As identified by NTCOS today, quote, "It is essential that funding is prioritised for those whose core business is the prevention of and response to DFSV. This includes women's safe houses, DFSV crisis accommodation, DFSV counselling services, specialist sexual assault counselling and response services, men's behaviour change programs and specialist DFSV legal services." This budget does not appear to be achieving this. Budgets should be shaped in our communities, not behind the closed doors of politicians and lobbyists. When so much is at stake, ordinary Territorians deserve a voice. Madam Speaker, the CLP's 2025-26 budget is a stark reminder of who the CLP really works for. It shovels public money into fossil fuel projects and prisons while denying long-term help to families and country. We deserve better. Thank you.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my job as an independent representative is to bring the voices, concerns and hopes of my wonderful community of Johnston into this chamber and to play my part along with all of you in making good law and good decisions for the whole of the Northern Territory. That's why I've been looking forward to seeing this CLP government's first budget, to understand what they prioritise, how they plan to spend our money and what kind of future they're trying to build. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the economy is not separate from the health of our society, it's a reflection of it. And the budget is one of the most powerful tools we have to shape that collective future. A budget is more than numbers on a page, it's a moral document. It tells us who matters. It shows us whose needs will be met and whose will be ignored or delayed. That's why I rise today to call for a people-centred budget. Not as a soft alternative to economic responsibility, but as the most strategic, effective and future-focused way to build a stronger, fairer Northern Territory. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, people are the economy. But this budget risks repeating the mistakes of the past, prioritising private industry profits over economic growth for everyone, relying on incarceration over prevention, and once again sidelining the communities most affected, especially Aboriginal people who are disproportionately impacted by these policies, yet rarely consulted on them. Too often we hear of consultation after decisions have already been made, and this budget is no exception. There can be no lasting change, no safety, no justice, no true economic growth without the meaningful inclusion of Aboriginal people in decision-making, design and leadership. We cannot build a strong economy on broken systems, burned out workforces or communities are left behind. We build it by making sure that people are safe, housed, educated, healthy and included so that they can contribute, innovate and lead. There are parts of this budget to welcome, such as the gambling tax, spending on housing and domestic violence, a boost for the health budget and the rejection of the notion of austerity. But it remains at its core a budget of missed opportunities and misdirected priorities. Mr Deputy Speaker, this government has called this the law and order budget, and we're told that it puts victims first. But when nearly $1.5 billion is allocated to public order and safety, more police, more prison beds and longer sentences, it doesn't look like a budget centred on victims. It looks like a budget obsessed with incarceration rather than transformation. More prison beds are not a sign of success, they are a symptom of failure. Failure to invest early, failure to heal trauma, failure to listen to the communities most affected by violence and disadvantage, especially Aboriginal communities who are shamefully and devastatingly overrepresented in this government's punitive response, and failure to do what will work to make all of us safer. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know we cannot imprison our way to a safer territory. That's a political illusion. Real safety, as I said, comes from housing, healing, jobs and justice. We're being asked to spend more than $500 million on prison infrastructure and operations, largely in response to policies introduced months ago, rush bail laws, new offences and cuts to community-led prevention programs. And let me be very clear, this is not a proactive investment in community safety. This is the cost of decisions made without evidence, without proper scrutiny and without meaningful consultation with Aboriginal leaders, community leaders, organisations and communities who have been calling for a different path. Decisions that are now costing us millions of dollars. And for what? Crime has not gone down. People are not safer. Prisons are more crowded, more dangerous and more expensive. We already know what drives crime, we know what the root causes are, yet this budget offers little more than token responses to them and instead pours millions of dollars into what will make things worse. Instead of funding what works, housing, mental health services, youth development, culturally safe programs, we're spending hundreds of millions to entrench the cycle of incarceration while we're fining families, evicting vulnerable people into homelessness and passing laws designed to disproportionately target, control, harm and disempower Aboriginal Territorians, causing the greatest harm to those with the least power. We send people into prison with trauma and release them with more, and then we act surprised when they reoffend. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot build justice on foundations of harm. We need to fund healing, not just punishment. Investing in prevention and early intervention, in community support, in trauma-informed services, in restorative justice is not only more humane, it's smart, it's cost-effective, and it will actually do something to make us safer. Mr Deputy Speaker, where is the vision in this budget? It's really welcome to see a continued and extended commitment to funding responses to domestic, family and sexual violence, which we all know is the crime crisis in the Northern Territory. I want to acknowledge that the government has committed $36 million per year ongoing to address this issue. Mr Deputy Speaker, I understand from the Minister that this is all new money, and that's a positive and welcome step forward. It's a good story, and it's one that reflects the importance of investing in the right areas for our most vulnerable. In particular, the expansion of the co-responder model, the specialist courts, and the increase in funding for frontline services and men's behaviour change programs are important and much-needed additions. This will help ensure the sustainability of our domestic, family and sexual violence sector. So it's definitely a step in the right direction, but several key sector asks have not been considered, were not funded or have even been defunded. This includes no funding being allocated to a domestic, sexual and family violence peak, a loss of funding for some early intervention programs, and no commitment or alignment with the coroner's recommendations, with many of the coroner's recommendations, including the death review. One area of concern is the lack of evaluation for programs like Circuit Breaker. This is a program that the CLP consistently refers to as an example of what they're doing to address the root causes of crime and supporting young people, but we have no information on whether it's actually working to do that. If there has been an evaluation of this program, can this please be made public so that we can see that it is working as intended or meeting the needs of our communities? It's also important to note that Circuit Breaker is not a domestic, family and sexual violence early intervention program. It falls under Child Protection and Corrections, which means that it cannot and should not be funded at the expense of specialist domestic, family and sexual violence services. And in fact, the welcome introduction and expansion of initiatives like this and the co-responder programs will likely increase demand on frontline services. And I'm concerned that these services are not adequately resourced to manage this potential growth. And I also have concerns about the sustainability of programs that continue to be funded year by year without long-term security. The Minister has said that she's working with the sector to identify what works and what doesn't, but it's unclear what process this government is using to work with the sector. Given that the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Advisory Forum, which did play that role, has been dissolved, What methodology is guiding decisions about what works? Who's involved in those decisions? We want to make sure that whatever we do here, however we spend our money, actually works to make our community safe, to keep our women and children safe. We must have evidence-based approaches that we properly evaluate. We must invest in community-controlled organisations that are trusted and proven to make a difference. As I said, we're yet to see any funding allocated for a domestic, family and sexual violence specific peak body, something that exists throughout the rest of Australia, which would serve as a vital advocacy and coordination mechanism and make sure that what we're doing, everything works together consistently to the same end. And there's also still no clear commitment or response to the recommendations from the Domestic Family Sexual Violence Coronial Inquest. There's no commitment, as I said, to the death review. We're missing critical pieces that could ensure long-term, essential, systemic change that ensures we're not left picking up the pieces, but we're actually addressing the issues before they happen. If we don't listen and act deeply and consistently to organisations, to those with expertise, to those on the front line, then we're not serious about ending this crisis. We're not even really managing it. The CLP calls this a budget of confidence and growth, driven by gas, mining, defence and tourism. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, confidence for whom and growth for whom? This economic strategy leans heavily on fossil fuels and private sector mega projects, facilitating huge profits for offshore companies while downplaying environmental risks, social inequality and community consent. What happens when this growth excludes our most marginalised, when water, land and housing needs are cast aside in favour of short-term industry deals, when Aboriginal communities are consulted after the fact? And while we hear promises of jobs, the budget offers little for local procurement reform, limited youth employment initiatives and no new Aboriginal employment targets in the public sector. If we want a resilient, sustainable economy, we must invest in people, not just projects. Mr Deputy Speaker, the government speaks of fiscal responsibility, trimming operating expenses and cutting consultancies, and I welcome that. But let's be clear, repairing the bottom line must not come at the cost of essential services. We've heard the government ask agencies to find $20 million in annual savings. In the past, similar targets have quietly resulted in fewer frontline workers, reduced program delivery and the erosion of community-based supports, particularly in regional and remote areas. And where is the investment in our community sector, which is not just social support, but is a major employer and the backbone of the economy in remote areas? We know that in the Territory, over 11% of our workforce is in the community services sector. That's larger than in mining or in construction, but this sector is stretched thin, underfunded, under-resourced and struggling to retain staff. Just on Tuesday in this chamber, the government passed a bill which repealed community sector portable long service leave, a bill which would work to attract and retain community sector workers here in the Northern Territory. Mr Deputy Speaker, a people-centred budget would treat the community sector not as charity but as a critical economic infrastructure. It would fund service delivery at real cost, accounting for inflation, workforce pressures and regional complexity. It would co-design a territory-wide workforce strategy to build and retain skilled workers, and it would invest in wages, professional development and career pathways, particularly for Aboriginal people and people working remotely. When we invest in this sector, we're not just funding the people who look after all of us, we're creating jobs, reducing employment and building long-term community capability. Because fiscal sustainability is only meaningful if it sustains the people who rely on public services every day. Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the support for families in this budget, back to school vouchers, utilities caps and housing grants. And I'm also pleased to see continued funding for the NT concession scheme. However, it's disappointing that eligibility for this scheme has not been expanded to include people on some of the lowest incomes in our community, such as those on job seeker and youth allowance. And while positive, all these policies are band-aids on structural problems. There's no offer of systemic fix to rental affordability. There's no strategy for food security in remote communities, and there's no comprehensive plan to expand social housing stock. The freeze on registration costs is welcome, but again, supports to address the cost of living are not targeted at those who need them most. Similarly, while continued Commonwealth funding for the Housing Energy Upgrade Fund and the Solar Grant Scheme is a step forward, the absence of new Northern Territory Government investment in renewable energy is a missed opportunity for all of us. Targeted investment in energy efficiency and solar for social housing and rentals would not only reduce living costs for disadvantaged Territorians, it would help future-proof our energy systems and accelerate our shift to sustainability. And yes, grants for first home buyers are welcome, but they also risk inflating prices while ignoring the rental crisis and community housing needs. Ultimately, Mr Deputy Speaker, a people-centred budget is not a luxury, it's a precondition for long-term prosperity for us here in the Northern Territory. We cannot build an economy on prisons and on poverty. We cannot build workforce participation without housing or regional development without trust. We cannot grow our private sector while neglecting the human infrastructure that keeps communities together. And we certainly can't reduce debt if we keep funding failure, spending billions on the costs of crisis, the physical and psychological harm our society experiences, while refusing to invest in the things that would prevent it in the first place. A smarter path is possible, one grounded in community-led solutions rather than top-down command, in evidence-based policy rather than political optics, and in meaningful ongoing consultation with Aboriginal people, not just tick-boxing after decisions have already been made. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the cheapest, smartest and most effective way to build a stronger Territory is to put people, all people, at the centre of every decision we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Johnson. And